Today I have the honor and privilege of introducing today's speaker, Colonel Sam Gardiner. As you know, he designs and conducts war games, which I think we'll hear some about today. Colonel Gardiner has taught strategy and military operations at the National War College, at the Air War College, and the Naval War College. He's been a visiting scholar at the Swedish Defense College, and of course I'm sure recognize him, and you'll recognize his voice from seeing him on CNN and the NewsHour and BBC television and listening to him on NPR. The Colonel has conducted games for the Air Force, Navy, Army, CIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, and the State Department. Has been involved and facilitated recent State Department strategy reviews on Burma, Kosovo, Haiti, Bangladesh, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Zimbabwe, Nepal, and Afghanistan. Maybe New Jersey. But that's probably secret, right? In 2004, he conducted a war game organized by Atlantic Monthly to gauge how an American president might respond militarily or otherwise to Iran's rapid progress toward developing nuclear weapons. He's also conducted war games on North Korea, and he recently designed and conducted a series of seminar war games on irregular warfare in Malaysia, Singapore, Australia, and Poland for the U.S. Air Force. The Colonel is an author of a recent report, Dangerous and Getting More Dangerous, the Delicate Situation Between the United States and Iran, in which the Colonel warns of dangers of escalation in the U.S.-Iran confrontation. His combat decorations include the Bronze Star, and his other decorations include the Legion of Merit. We're very pleased to have Colonel Gardiner here today speaking to us on military and covert options for Iran. Thank you, Colonel.
The table, right? Everybody talks about the table. Some of the statements. Everybody's talking about the options on the table. I don't know what the table looks like, but like you, I worry about the table. People that talk about the table worry me because I'm not sure they really can follow through when they start using table talk. I think the table is clear. I think we are in the process of starting some new things with Iran. I think we have got to think about that in different ways. What I'm going to argue is what is no longer on the table that these people said is on the table. Then I'm going to sort of get to the end and suggest what that means. I've got to say a couple things first. This is very important that we say this to ourselves because we get distorted by what people say. Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program. I repeat, Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program. The highest intelligence officer in the U.S. government says that. The previous highest intelligence officer in the U.S. government says that. We have politicians, however. The Secretary of State said, we've got to stop Iran's nuclear weapons program. If you go into the problem with a mistaken assumption, you'll come out with bad policy. Not only do the highest intelligence officer in this country say that, equally important, and I'm going to get to this and why it's important, the Russians say Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapons program. All of that doesn't mean that Iran can't be dangerous. All of that doesn't mean that Iran isn't supporting terrorist groups. You can get to that after you get through that first big hurdle. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to, as they say in pool, I'm going to run the table. Specifically, what I'm going to do is talk about the situation and what no longer works to think about. What in the world is he doing? Starting with Russia to resolve. No. If anything that's happened in the past 90 days that is significant, to Iran, that's significant to Afghanistan, that's significant to the Middle East. It is Russia. Tomorrow in Moscow, there will be a meeting of the Russian Security Council and the Government Council in coordination, at which they will approve a new national security strategy for Russia. That national security strategy recognizes the region as being one of the primary interests of Russia. Monday, the Iranian defense minister was in Moscow to talk about military cooperation. Get that? The Iranian Minister of Defense was in Moscow to talk about military cooperation. Now think about the consequence of that. We have U.S. policymakers who say, we're going to get the Iranians to support us to do sanctions, and they are talking about military cooperation. Let me push this button a little further about where things are in Russia. This is from a draft of the Russian National Security Strategy, and it's more focused than anything they have had since the end of the Cold War. They say that they will struggle with the United States over hydrocarbons, and that struggle will take place in the Middle East and Central Asia. They will struggle with the United States over hydrocarbons. That is a very specific thing they are telling us. They have already started to implement that strategy. We will ask them to support our efforts to stop the Iranian nuclear program, where, on the other hand, they in fact are doing just the opposite. As you know, they have been supporting the construction of the nuclear reactor at Bashir. Just recently, they have accelerated the movement of fuel there. They have announced they're going to go to 2,300 technicians, and according to the Iranian ambassador in Moscow, they're going to build another nuclear reactor. We're trying to get them to help us stop the Iranian nuclear program, and the Russians are accelerating their help with the Iranians. We have two more things about the Russians. The Russians have sold the Iranians the Tor M1 missile. It's a low-altitude missile, primarily good against cruise missiles. The United States weapon would use if it ever were to strike Iran. At that meeting on Monday, the Iranian defense minister wanted to talk about the S-300. The S-300 is a very sophisticated, high-altitude, long-range, multiple-target acquisition weapon system that would cause Israel particular problems if the Iranians have it. Probably not the United States, because we have the stealth capability. But this is a very significant move in improving Iranian air defense. The Russians are really smooth. They've agreed to sell it, but have delayed the sale. Like in many other cases, what the Russians are doing is holding that over the United States to be negotiated as we move forward. But it's still significant in terms of what I see as this emerging relationship with the Russians. The Russians delivered some helicopters to the Iranians last week, supposedly for search and rescue, but this helicopter also has an attack version. It can be modified as an attack aircraft. Russia is using air defense in the region as a way to increase its influence. That's why those air defense missiles are so important. Beyond what I had on the slides, the Russians have signed a new agricultural agreement with the Iranians. At that meeting, the Iranian negotiator called it a strategic partnership. Whoa. Strategic partnership between Iran and Russia. Low-level official, but that word beginning to emerge more and more. The Russians have talked to the Armenians. Now this gets kind of obtuse, but Armenia is out in the middle of Azerbaijan, north of Iran. The Armenians have a close relationship with the Russians. The Russians have talked to the Armenians about building a refinery there to serve both Armenia with its excess going to serve Iran. So even in the way of developing things for Iran's Got to mention this. I call it a strategic event. An event that will be used over the next 6 to 9 months as arguments by those who believe that the United States needs to do something seriously about Iran. This was the space launch. People didn't believe that the Iranians could do this, and we still don't really know how well it was done. But the image and the press that has gone with it, and the arguments that begin to come, this is a strategic event. Here's what's important, and I'll make this point as I go through it in a number of ways. It's about time. There is a dimension of time unfolding in front of the U.S. and U.S. policymakers that is crunching things down to a very narrow window. One of these is the launch of this missile. People say, if they can launch that kind of missile, then we need to hurry and do something. Now, this discussion is not about the missile defense program in Europe that was supposedly to deal with the Iranians, but you can see where this leads. It leads to the requirement why we have to have the missile sites in the Czech Republic and Poland. Okay, can't go farther without talking about the Israeli dimension. Here's what's important. Because this will be a major pressure on U.S. policymakers. We've seen the strategic communications theme that Israel is going to unfold over the next months. And it goes like this. Iran has enough enriched uranium for a weapon right now. Now you have a footnote in that is it's low enriched uranium and it has to be enriched more before you can have a weapon. He didn't say that. The ambassador didn't say that. This is what we will hear from Israel. Iran has enough uranium now for a bomb. And this will occur sometime in 2009. So you begin to see the time tension. 2009 is the window, but something has to be done. Okay, it looks like we can identify the next prime minister. He said a year ago that Iran has 12 months of sanctions before we have to do something more seriously. The 12 months are up. He has said Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Israel doesn't accept the United States position that Iran does not have a weapons program. The new prime minister will heavily pressure the United States to do something and do something quickly. Now, let me talk where we are with U.S. policy. I think the bottom line, let me do that first. U.S. policy is still being formed. We know some elements of it, but we can't really say specifics yet. Here's what we know. We know that the president has said we want a new emphasis on respect. Engagement is the place to start. And he said, however, and this is a little bit of a twist on the first two, there are some bottom lines. And what gets filled in there is this notion that Iran has to stop its support of terrorist groups and has to stop enrichment. He has said we're going to have a special team to deal with the Middle East. We've seen some of them, and we probably in the near future will see some more. This has emerged, the last item very recently, which is the administration is going to ask Iran to help it with Afghanistan. So you see there's some tension here going on already. It's not clarity. In fact, I think it may add to the confusion, but it sure suggests why U.S. policy is in play. This is what Vice President Biden said at the conference in Munich 2 weeks ago. If Iran abandons its illicit nuclear program and its support for terrorism, then we will have meeting incentives. You know, that's nothing different than the previous administration said. That was the line that George Bush had in Condoleezza Rice. You had to abandon those programs, and then we would begin to do something meaningful in the international arena. So that's a little bit of a thing to concern. Then this is the connection that begins to make the Iranian thing much more significant. The United States has begun to tie Iran's behavior to the way we treat the Russians. Well, that's very significant. We brought the Russians into the equation. telling them that if, I hope she didn't really say it this way, because this is really bizarre, that if Iran gives up its nuclear program, then we don't have to do the missile defense. But you know that's not going to happen immediately. So this is going to be a problem with the Russians if this position doesn't get modified. But you can see what's happened. When I said things are different, it is now not just about Israel, the United States, and Iran. It is about the United States, Iran, Russia, and Afghanistan, and even Iraq. The whole situation has become much bigger. Okay, and then I want to talk about sanctions because we got to talk about the things that are not going to be on the table. People talk about this as if we were just thought it up. We've been doing sanctions on Iran for 30 years. 30 years of sanctions. And their behavior has not changed. Okay. There are some that are on the table that people are talking about. Here are 5 of them. There are 4 of them. Travel bans, prohibitions on bank things, restrictions on companies dealing with the Revolutionary Guard, family. These are not going to change your behavior. We can talk about this in the Q&A. That is not behavior-changing sanctions. Here's what's interesting. This is a communications line coming out of Israel right now, which is, it's time to get to the real essence of the sanctions and stop Iran from importing refined petroleum products. Big deal. Let me just show you the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee said the same thing, and I'm looking at the part of the bottom. For example, what the new president can do is implement the banning of imports. Now, a couple of things about this. There was a resolution in the Congress in the last term where the Congress was asked to vote on this as a sanction, to recommend to the president a sanction. When then candidate Obama gave a presentation to the APAC, he said, what we need to do with the Iranians is such things as banning petroleum imports. This I put in the category, and I'm going to start building this, of things that people say on the table that aren't really on the table. Let me see if I can show you what I mean. Let me say it. This is I don't know why in some foreign policy problems that are particularly difficult, policymakers do sequential thinking and stop at the next step without going to the steps beyond that. It's sort of like we're going to be greeted with flowers, so therefore we don't think about the management of the country of Iraq afterwards. Let's do sanctions. Well, then we'll see what happens. Well, you don't have to do that. With a little bit of analysis, you can figure out what's going to happen. Here's what's in people's mind. Remember that Iran had some problems a few years ago over the price of gasoline. There were these kind of lines, people objected, so the people who said this have that in mind. Boy, we can really put pressure on the government and they will change their behavior. The thing that people point to is there are now 5 companies primarily that provide refined products to Iran. Let me just say it's a little bizarre that a country with that much oil has to import gasoline. Well, but that primarily is because the Iraqis bombed it, and they just haven't built back from the war with Iraq. About 40% is the number that people use that they have to import into Iran. Here are the 5 companies primarily do it. So people say, if we could just get those 5 companies not to import gasoline, then we put really heavy sanctions on them, and surely they'll change their behavior. Not so fast. But let me do a little background on that. I mentioned the bombing of the refineries during the war with Iraq. They got by okay, thank you very much. I mean, sure, they were hardships, but they got by. They have also banned imports at periods of time on their own. So this wouldn't be anything new for them. They have new refineries under construction. 3 will come online this year. And if they do get put into this box, there are third countries or third parties who will provide them with gasoline. Just now, Singapore has picked up some of it. They are looking for an excuse to raise gasoline prices. We know if gasoline prices go up, consumption will go down. They plan to do it gradually because they don't feel they can do it all at once. But thank you very much if the Americans were the cause of that. What else might they do? Bizarre. Iran now provides electricity to Afghanistan, to Iraq, and Pakistan. Cut that off? Well, okay, they probably would. And then will there be anything else, like sending refugees into Afghanistan? The leaders in Afghanistan say that the refugees that come from Iran, high percentage of them go to the Taliban. And the reason they go to the Taliban is because there's no work anyplace else. So Iran has their finger on that trigger. This month, just showed up in the oil press 2 days ago. They have increased their imports this month, probably building up in case the Americans go down this route. So, I'm sorry, I take that off the table. I'm sorry, there is no option of serious increased sanction, despite the fact that it is being broadcast and argued by an awful lot of people. Iran, if they haven't changed their behavior at this point, are not going to change their behavior by banning imports. Not to mention that if we stop ships on the open ocean, it's an act of war, preventing them from going into Iran. But that's a separate issue. Okay. Now I'm really going to stop the other part of the table. I'm going to talk about covert operations. So the first thing you're going to say is, whoa, how can you talk about covert operations? Iran is bizarre. The situation in Iran is bizarre because everybody has written about the covert operations in Iran. And all you have to do is a little research to make a picture of it. Let me give you an example. There are research journalists, such as Cybers from New York, who have written about groups that the United States has funded. The groups that the United States has funded have websites. They say, here's what we have been doing inside Iran. And the Iranians, which I can't explain why, will say, and we had a fight yesterday and 2 of our soldiers were killed when we encountered this and that proxy group. So you can triangulate. Research journalists tell me what groups are doing it. The groups tell me what they did. Iran confirms it. So you can be pretty confident of knowing what is going on. And despite the fact that I call it covert operations, it really is all over the press. And let me do a summary of what I think is going on. Clearly, we have intelligence collection going on. We have disruptive information operations going on. We have supported at least 4 proxy groups conducting combat operations inside Iran, and we probably have had a program to disrupt their nuclear program. We possibly have had an assassination program, and we possibly have on the books a major destructive event against the Iranian nuclear program. Let me sort of build those details. The Telegraph particularly has good sources, or has sources of Telegraph. There was an operation conducted last summer against a convoy that was moving munitions to Hezbollah. Probably the Israelis were behind it, maybe the Americans were really too. What you can get the picture is if you're Iran, somebody is attacking our military forces inside our country. And whose ever signatures on that doesn't make any difference. If you're the leadership of Iran, you have been attacked by somebody, and the suspicions are pretty clear of who it would be. The oldest proxy group is the MEK. The United States, the Pentagon picked up support for them very close to the end of the fighting in Iraq. That support is going on. They've done intelligence operations. They've done operations inside Iran itself. Lots of women in the organization. In the north of Iraq, there is the PJAK, the Free Life Party of Kurdistan, which is separate from the PKK. There are 2 Kurdish groups. This is the group that has been operating into Iran with the objective of disrupting the government. Then operating out of Pakistan is the Jandula, or the Army of God, led by the man you see here. Here's what the Iranians know about this group. They have captured his brother. reporting what I talked to a reporter who was in Iran. So they captured his brother. The captured brother says he goes to the American embassy in Pakistan periodically and gets guidance and money. CBS has covered this, pointed out that this is being supported by the United States. I'll talk a little bit more about them, but this is a particularly ugly group doing things inside Iran. This is a series of attacks that peaked during the early summer and midsummer. You can see if you were in the command center in Tehran, and somebody showed you the map of American attacks, you would be pretty upset. Fighting has fallen off. This level of activity is not now going on. The reason for this, there was probably an attempt to do disruption of the Iranian government and have a sort of coordinated attack. Since then, however, essentially what's happened is, particularly the proxy groups have failed. The MEK, probably at the convincing of the Iranians, the MEK has been told by Iraq that they have 60 days to get out of the country. Iraq has also said that we are going to try leadership of the MEK. So essentially the MEK is being wiped off the map. So that part of covert operations are no longer on the table. Okay? Do you begin to get the picture of what my argument, where it goes? PJAC. Now this is the Iranian press. It said PJAC has laid down its arms. We do know this. Their building where their website was bombed. They were off the air for probably about 90 days, although they're back on. They are no longer publishing anything about conducting operations. In addition to that, 2 weeks ago, the State Department declared them a terrorist group. Yeah. So this is all. I can't say, but what you begin to feel is some of this tension between state and defense. Defense was probably the one funding them, and it's the State Department that declares groups terrorist groups. But, telling you, another option for covert operations off the table. So you say, so you see what I'm beginning to do? If you're looking for things on the table, they begin to go off rather quickly. The one group that's still operating is Jandula. These 16 policemen were executed. Jandula has a very unpleasant practice of leaving a DVD behind after they conduct an operation of people that they have assassinated. I've seen killings in their DVDs of heads being cut off. So they particularly don't create hearts and minds problems. Saturday, another operation on the border with Iran conducted. Iran always says this is probably Jandula. And then just this week, yesterday, there was an explosion at a mosque. They're blaming this group on that explosion. Israel, there's an article in the Telegraph this last week that said Israel has increased its covert operations. I think that's true. I've gotten reports from reporters inside Israel who say the same thing. They're afraid the Obama administration is going to go soft, so they're beginning to take actions that they can to disrupt their program. Okay. 2 down, 1 to go. Sanctions, doesn't look good. Covert operations, although it hadn't been talked about, that was tried now for probably 2 years, doesn't seem to have changed Iranian behavior. Okay, now you're going to say we haven't tried this one. Let me talk about the military option, and I'll do it very quickly. Probably people who think about this think about 2 things. One of them is punishment, and the other is setting back the Iranian nuclear program. So now I'm going to tell you, if we were down to that, the only thing on the table, will this one work? Can we achieve those objectives with what's left over? Here are the targets that I think we would go after. Punishment. Remember, Iran is not adhering to international norms. They support terrorists. They haven't stopped their nuclear enrichment program. Therefore, they have to be punished. What comes up on the screen is the military units whose mission it is to protect the Islamic Revolution. That's the Revolutionary Guard. Certainly need to be thought of as targets. But now, can you see that? What you begin to see is people that talk about the military option. I don't know of any country other than North Korea that has prepared itself for an American attack like Iran has. Look at this. This is where they have configured their division. Everything is covered up. Everything is in the weapons. Here's another thing, another division. Look at those, they're in the revetments along that road. Isn't Google wonderful? We would want to go after the terrorist training camps. Those have always been on anybody's list. Here's where those are. Okay, after you did those, here's the briefing that you would get in the White House the next day. We probably didn't do any serious damage to the Revolutionary Guard. The strikes on the terrorist training camps did little damage, and Iran has not stopped its enrichment program. So you're beginning to like the military option better all the time? Okay, let's go after the nuclear facilities. Here are the key facilities. Before we talk about how we do that, let me mention the weapon we'd use. Penetrating bomb to go after deep underground things. Standard weapon with the U.S. Air Force. First target on everybody's list is Natanz. 2 meters of concrete buried 18 meters under the ground. That's a lot of stuff on top of that. They've dug and buried it there. Here's sort of the way that would be targeted. Each one of those are individual aim points. Probably 1 or 2 weapons would go in each one. What you begin to see, and I'll come back to this, lots of ammo to get to this facility, right? You might suspect where I'm going. I'm beginning to talk about this when I get done with this. But you see what the U.S. would have to do if we were going to target those things. Here is the research facility at Esfahan. Whoops. Look at what they're doing. They're beginning to tunnel now. The original facility at Natanz was dig and cover. Now they're beginning to dig tunnels. Makes it much more difficult to target. Here's sort of where the targeting would be done if we were to attack Esfahan. We would attack the heavy water plant at Iraq, A-R-A-K, Iraq, with these areas. Parchin is the weapons testing facility run by Revolutionary Guard engineering units. There have been some reports of work on nuclear weapons triggers there. Certainly we'd want to target that. But look at this. This is amazing to me. These are the administrative buildings around Parchin. Each one of them is surrounded by a revetment. Now, that doesn't mean they can't be hit. What that means is each one of them has to be hit with an individual weapon. Okay, so now you're beginning to see you're going to end up not liking the military option a lot when you get there. Probably wouldn't target Bashir. Russians there, it's not part of the enrichment program that we fear, so that would probably be left unhit. Okay, how'd we do? You're not going to like this very well. What we can say is we set back construction 3 to 5 years because we knew how long it took them to construct those facilities. Therefore, we can judge, if we destroy them, they'll have to build them again. But we can, this is what makes policy hard. Did we set back the nuclear program or did it cause it to accelerate? You probably shouldn't pick an option when you don't know which way it'll go. That's the problem with the military option. It could end up accelerating Iran's nuclear program. Okay, now, I did okay so far. Now, we're in the briefing, and the military chiefs give that presentation on targeting, and then they stand up and say, and Mr. President, if we do that, the military recommend that we also go after the Iranian capability to attack at us. We just think of the logic. You're not going to stir up the hornet's nest and not kill some hornets. That's both literally and figuratively. The Iranians have their 14 hornets. Here are 2 at Esfahan on air defense alert. military are going to say we have to target. And think of the logic. If the president says no, and an American in Iraq was killed by a strike of that, the president couldn't say no. I don't think he could say no. You have to include the Iranian response capability in the targeting. Here are the shelters at the Bashir airport. Again, what you see is very heavy sheltering with blast walls. So each one of those would have to have an individual weapon. The military would argue that you have to go after the submarines because Iran would want to close the Gulf. You've got to go after the submarines before they get out of port. Here are the 3 submarines they got from the Russians, plus the 2 mini submarines that they probably build on their own. We would want to go after the missile patrol boats because they would be used to shut down the Gulf. We would want to go after the cruise missiles because they would be used to shut down the Gulf. The cruise missiles that are at the whole range of locations, and they are bunkered. This is the way they bunker the cruise missiles. We could not do this without attacking the missile launch areas because Iraq is under the gun, literally, if we didn't do that. So this is the target area that they usually move the missiles to that we would want to strike. Okay, how did we do? You're wondering how we did. We destroyed the combat aircraft pretty effectively. We destroyed the big naval vessels, but remaining small boats, terrorists, chemical capabilities, which I'll talk about, and some missile capabilities. So Iran is still a threat to the Gulf, even after this relatively extended period of bombing. Okay, let me talk about the consequences. Not only isn't it clear that we could achieve our success, but in this case, you have to understand how the Iranians might respond. They have a range of options, little or no response. And actually, that has its problems too, all the way to broad violent responses. And let me show you some consequences. Even under the no response, the Iranians will be victims. And it will, in my mind, be a lot like the Danish cartoon. There will be riots in Europe, throughout the Middle East, Malaysia, people who said it's the Americans attacking Muslims. So even if they don't respond, there is going to be a political consequence or cost to pay. Hezbollah. This is from the United States Intelligence Estimate of Terrorism. They will consider attacking the homeland of the United States, particularly if there's a direct threat to Iran. So what very well could be established by this attack is terrorist attacks inside the United States. Pipelines are vulnerable in Iraq. Doesn't take much to imagine that we see 1 million barrels a day come off the market because of attack on the pipelines in Iraq. Infiltration increases into Iraq, and there are more attacks against the U.S. soldiers that are there. In 1987, they put a lot of mines in the Gulf. They still have mines like that. They have more sophisticated mines. Remember, we didn't destroy those in those air attacks. We would expect mines in the Gulf. We would expect them to use the small speedboats to interfere with Gulf traffic. They've said they're going to do this. And we would find a jump in oil prices and insurance rates. We tend to think of this as a spasm. We do the attack, there's a spike in oil, and that's it. And it's over. I think the Iranians would think of it more like what happened during the war in Iraq. I call it an oil plateau, which is by gradual attacks on tankers going out, not by a spasm. What they do is cause oil to go up and stay out for an extended period of time, like in terms of 4 or 5 years, if you look back to the history. So this is in a paper I wrote. I won't go over all of these, but essentially you can see a whole range of possibilities of the Iranians. There are governments in the region who said that they are concerned about their ability to stay in power if we were to conduct that attack. Clearly, the flow of oil would be stopped, and U.S. forces would become a target. That's the important thing to Now, I'm going to talk about Iran and the WMD. Let me make a point now about Israel. Israel has threatened to do it on their own. If anything, I hope you now have concluded, which is what I have very strongly, that the United States cannot let Israel have Iran on its own. It can't do it. So what it will do is stir up the hornet's nest. All those assets left to attack American forces, and no real damage done to the Iranian nuclear program. The United States, in this case, cannot allow Israel to dictate its foreign policy by attacking Iran. We must be very firm about that. I think the Bush administration did tell Israel that, and clearly the new administration needs to do the same thing. I had this at the end because we got to talk about this. Did you know, you remember, Iran really does have WMD. For 20 years, Iran has had a chemical weapons program. Iran had a chemical weapons program during the fight with Iraq and did not use it. Remember, people always say, well, if they get nuclear weapons, they're going to give it to terrorists. Why haven't they given chemical weapons to terrorists? I suspect because it's not in their national interest. Has Israel's existence been threatened by chemical weapons, which are probably more destructive than 2, 3, or 4 nuclear weapons? Israel doesn't even mention that. Let me show you what some of my analysis on. This is what you find in the press about the chemical weapons that Iran has. The whole range delivered by artillery and aircraft delivered bombs. All that stuff is bad stuff. You remember how Israel was threatened during the war with Iraq, the first war? That all the gas masks got passed out? It's bad stuff. Again, my own analysis of Google. At Esfahan is a major chemical plant. There is also a major air base there. About 2 miles from that air base, there is a series of shelters that are unlike any shelters anywhere else in Iran. And if you'll see what I've done, not only are there unique shelters, but they actually have 2 and 3 levels of fencing around the shelter. My conclusion, they have been increasing their chemical weapons. So that you have to think about that. Here is a country that has probably a growing capability to deliver WMD. Okay, now let me begin to talk about the future. I want to go to the far right, first of all. I said options on the table. Let me make this argument. A military option isn't any good after you use it. Military option is not likely to change behavior after you use it. What changes behavior is the fear of the use of military options, right? Does that make sense? That, you can see that once Iran has been attacked, they're going to respond, and the people will demand that they respond. But if you threaten Iran and they see this in front of them, that's when one would hope that they change behavior. The Bush administration has already used the military instrument. In the first 2 months of 2007, 2 aircraft carriers were sent to the Gulf, very specifically identified as being to send a message to the Iranians. We sent additional minesweepers, we sent additional fighter airplanes, and we increased the public affairs communications, isolating Iran from the Iranians. It didn't change the behavior. Okay, so where have I gone now? Doesn't look like sanctions are going to work. Doesn't look like covert operations are working. And it doesn't look like the military option works. So I go back and I tell those 3 people we started with, stuff on the table probably isn't there. You have a clean table, which means, and this is really where I think this goes, which I think is the profound thing, we have to think about this in a completely different way. We have to get off all this old thing. Russia's now involved, and we don't really have any good options left. To punish them. The punish has been the primary option we take. Now, let me go back to the time difference I mentioned. The United States will be under time pressure from Israel, her 2009 is when they have a weapon. You've got to do it now. In fact, just to underline that, full-page ad in today's Wall Street Journal from asking if we are supporting a nuclear Iran. It's a group often associated with Israeli causes that is buying full-page ads. It feels like the build-up to Gulf II, doesn't it? Anyway, we're good at that. It's going to be a pressure. When Netanyahu takes office, that pressure is going to go up. Now, quickly, we don't have time to wait. What that does is it gives the new administration a real serious problem because you want to talk. How long do you talk if they don't change the meeting? So we're having meetings with the Iranians, and the Israelis are saying, hurry, 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 they're moving to the clock. And we've got another time to mention it. In June is the election in Iran. This was the last election. Even the Bush administration backed off Iran in the 90 days prior to the election, beginning about now up until the June election. See the lull in the strategic communications coming out, pointing a finger to Iran. So the administration is facing that problem also. Hurry problem. We can't hurry because we don't want Ahmadinejad to be reelected. We should be nice if we want her to be reelected. So these time frames begin to come through. Now, what should we do? I'll save that until after the Q&A is over. What I do think, however, and this is really the bottom line, the table is empty. Metaphorically, what we've got to do is change the way we're thinking about this in whole different ways. Because of the Russians, because of the fact that we just don't have the option. And so it's going to really require some hard work and policy. So I'll take questions and then I'll give the real answer.
Because the options are off the table, is that the reason prior to the administration coming on board, there's been great discussion that Dennis Ross would be given the portfolio for Iran? And recent discussions are that he's not getting it yet because the policy has not been determined. Do you have any insight into what's going on?
No, other than I know that I'm on email from a lot of people in Washington, and I would say probably 10 emails a day are anti-Dennis Ross. I don't mean this for Jordan, I mean this for the peace community in Washington is targeting Dennis Ross. I mean, they are pressuring Congress to take him off. Yeah, but if I don't know him. If you just look at his positions, he is much of the same. Other than, yeah, please.
Hi. You started this discussion by saying that the intelligence community says Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program. I think that's an incredibly misleading statement. I want to tell you why, and I want you to comment on that.
Sure.
In the National Intelligence Estimate, it began with the headline statement that in 2003, Iran halted its nuclear weapons program. In a complex footnote to that very first sentence, they limited the definition, for the first time in history, of nuclear weapons program to mean only covert fissile material development and weaponization work.
Sure.
Meaning that all Iran would have to do is say, look, it's out in the open, it's overt, and we wouldn't consider that fissile material development as part of the program. The problem is, the same exact infrastructure and technology needed to create low-grade fissile material in open and declared facilities can, through a rinse and repeat process, be used for to create highly enriched uranium. So my question is...
No, that's good.
So I mean, based on this logic, they're never going to have a nuclear weapons program until they actually have a nuclear weapon.
Sure.
Can you address that?
Yeah, well, let me do other countries. How many countries are in the same category? Sweden, Japan, South Korea,
but you don't...
Germany. Oh yeah, we know Germany. Germany actually had a program. Okay, so, part of my argument is an argument. See, if we go ahead, if the president takes that position, goes in and says, well, yeah, they could have a nuclear program, then we go down the path. Go down the path A. if you take my argument and say, just say it, take the risk, they have no weapons program. Then go down the path of new thinking. That's so everything you say is right. Technically, it's right, but if we're going to change the mindset, the message has to be clear.
I agree with every single thing you said in the presentation, but I think by creating that technical error in your first premise, it delegitimizes everything else that this argument stands for. But other than that,
let me make one more point. It's very important that we watch the Iranians carefully. I asked the head of the Iranian delegation to the IAEA, I said, what's it really about? They're so open. I said, how many centrifuges are you going to have in the towns? This was back when they had thousands. He said, we're going to go to 30 or 50,000. This was way before anybody announced it. Okay, I say that because they haven't gone beyond 5,000. It's now been 6 months. We have to watch that. And if that's an indication, then we need to jump all over it. I don't know whether it is. We don't know. We have to. It's unclear how the Iranians are going to respond to the new administration and to new initiatives. They could thumb their nose at us. But we have to be prepared for that. But you have to go into it with new ideas, or you end up back where we were. And I can see the danger is that 6 months from now we are in the same position the Bush administration was in. But the only thing left is talk about military action. Because in my mind, that's the only one that's on the table if you keep going down that other road there. Please.
Thank you for your talk. My question concerns Israel and Iran. If the United States were to say, give Israel tacit approval of it acting militarily against Iran, would that be a viable option? Would that incur the same sort of response, the detrimental response that you talked about? And if we don't do that, do you think that they will act on their own?
2 points. One is the technical point. They can't do the targets. The Iranians have said if Israel attacks, we assume it's the United States, and they will respond. I mean, the logic is they're going to fly over. I mean, just think of it. They'll use American airplanes. They'll use the BLU-113. It sounds like Americans, looks like Americans. Okay. Here's what I would say, though, that is kind of weird. I think this is part of it. Given that change in the whole situation, the United States has got to tell Israel, we appreciate your need for security, but you have to understand that we have interests in the Middle East that are not the same. There are situations in which our interest will dominate. This now is becoming more and more like one of those. We cannot let Israel, it's not just a response, Israel would turn the deal with the Russians. We could end up in a new Cold War if Israel were allowed to do that. We have to say, I think, Israel, that is unacceptable.
Colonel Gardiner, thanks for coming again to Princeton. My question concerns Iran in the region. Yet another reason why perhaps we need a new approach towards Iran is that can we fundamentally achieve our objectives both in Afghanistan and Iraq without the cooperation of Iran?
Well, you know that the big thing that's on the table now is Afghanistan. General Petraeus yesterday was in Uzbekistan. He's got an agreement from the Russians, but not necessarily in Uzbekistan. We don't have a land line of communications into Afghanistan because of Pakistan. The Indians have said to Afghanistan, you can use the line to. So NATO has said to its NATO members, yeah, you can bring your supplies in through Iran. Yeah. I don't think Iran's going to let us bring in military weapons. But you can see how even that now more fundamental thing is beginning to work. Clearly they want to do something like drugs. General Petraeus said, get on board with stopping drugs from And you know that I sort of suggested the refugee program is doing this. heritage. We've got the finger on the trigger. Afghanistan can go back. Agree?
I agree. I mean, with the refugees, the refugee situation, I know in October, for example, they sent many Afghan refugees back to Afghanistan without any warning.
Yeah. And I heard from say most of them couldn't find a job, so they went to the Congo. Got money, pays salaries.
So my question is, to what extent would the internal factors and specifically the June elections affect U.S. calculus regarding Iran? And actually, do you see that as a big deal at all? Does Khatami have a potential?
Yeah. No, it's funny that there has been absolutely nobody in the administration that I have seen mention it. So, right? Has anybody seen it? I don't think nobody has said anything about it. It's just my assumption that based upon the analysis before, that we would look at it the same way. That's where I think probably come back to. We're going to see. It's got to happen soon. The administration has got to unfold policy. I suspect that within days. Please.
Tom Pickering says, "Don't wait for the elections." I wondered if you'd seen the plan put forward by Tom Pickering and a couple of other guys in your book. And he said in interviews, don't wait for the elections, go for it now.
Yeah. There is this division of the House, and I have to say that I'm not smart enough to know the answer to the following question. Tom Pickering, I've been at a couple seminars with him, in particular where he reviewed my paper on COVID observation. But he has this notion of there are incremental things that we can do and should do now. He says, for example, we ought to open Tehran to Washington direct flight. And what that means is that he describes it is that you just rename British Airways flight so that it has a number that goes from Tehran and terminates at Washington. That we ought to have things like the intersection of them. Okay. We ought to then have things like, and one of my arguments is we need an incident at sea agreement. So in the Gulf, if we could negotiate an incident at sea agreement with the Soviets, or not with the Iranians. He's about graduate. There are those who say we'll never get anything out of the Iranians until we go with the Grand Bargain. Can we come to the table and offer them a strategic security and a new Middle East security framework? I personally don't know Iran well enough to distinguish them, but that's being discussed in the State Department right now. Which one of those, where do we go?
Colonel, it's great to have you here. More of a basic general question, a follow-up to one my friend Danny was asking you earlier. I didn't hear you go too much into denial options, looking at things outside of Iran itself, not taking away things that it has, like its petroleum imports, but looking at things that it wants, that it expects to get, and then robbing it of that. And if you could just talk about that a little bit more, maybe something at a regional goal that it wants, possibly influence over Iraq or Afghanistan, or does it really have all the cards, and does it really have the role in the world that it wants right now?
That's an interesting question. Condoleezza Rice said, our objective is to isolate the Iranians. If you read the press, just do a Google on Iran, you almost have to laugh at them. Who is not doing business with the Iranians? Americans. The German oil companies, the Chinese, the Russians, Gazprom. So I don't think that anybody's going to buy up to the now. Even countries that sign up to sanctions. Look at that list of countries that are providing refined petroleum. Some of our best friends. I think that it leaks too much. The Iranians are more part of the world now than they were 10 years ago. I think. Would you say so? That they're...
I didn't want to interrupt. Are you done? Or?
I'm waiting for it.
Let me quickly be the advocate Tim Hurlimann, the Swiss ambassador who suggested this 2003 initiative, said many times that there are many realities in Iran. And I really feel urged to suggest, well, given if all the pressures are around and all the preparations, as you quite graphically described, are there may well be some who say, well, let's go the North Korean route. It is pretty clear that we don't know everything of any state, but certainly we know the least about Iran.
Yes, yes.
What if, because of some of the operations which are clearly taking place now inside the country, suddenly some people find out, wait a moment, there are cells here where more is going on than what we think. And as this one young gentleman here said before, it's actually a question of time and intensity to go from low to high elevation. And then you could receive some materials by snail mail, speak hand delivery. Anybody who knows the borders between Pakistan and Iran, Turkey and Iran, you can get all of those support. So where does your strategy go if we suddenly get conflicting, even those get conflicting information? What are we going to do then?
We have got to go the next step, which I didn't in this argument, and we've got to look the genie in the face and ask questions about it. I used to target nuclear weapons. I have to tell you, that they ain't what they are made up to be. Let me tell you what one of my students said at the War College, which I think is carried for a long time. Real men don't need nuclear weapons. That's really true. Nuclear weapons have almost no military utility. They have political utility. And I think that the new Director of National Intelligence said a very interesting thing last week about North Korea. And it could very well have been said about Iran. He said, North Korea won't use nuclear weapons unless we threaten the existence of the regime. I would make that argument back. Now the other argument I got to make, which is we've gotten caught up in political speak that interferes with policy. Netanyahu always says, Iran with nuclear weapons is an existential threat to Israel. It's even coined that existential national interest. That's it. People in the United States don't pick it up. You really have to push that point. Because I would say to him, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nuclear weapons will not stop the state of Israel in the face of your 40, 50, 60, however President Carter that he says they have. That's not you. They're not going to stop it. I was checked on that by a reporter, and this makes it more complicated, but it still has to be done, which is when Israel says it's an existential threat, what he really was saying that it is a threat to the idea of Israel. That if Israel can't secure a place for the Jews in the Middle East, then the idea of Israel is threatened. That's something that maybe you want to deal with, because that is an argument, not a physical. But you say the way they respond to it, it becomes that, right? If you say that when Iran has a weapon and Israel distances itself, then it is threatened by the presence of a weapon. Physically, weapons, American military guys don't even think about nuclear weapons anymore. They really have so little military utility. When I was at SHAPE, all this stuff is now in Soviet. A long time ago, but when targeting a Soviet division coming across the plains of Germany, we would put exercises, 12 weapons on the division. Well, and we're now saying that one weapon is going to threaten the existence of Israel. You know, I get stirred up on this. So much policy gets caught in our exaggeration. It's like the missile thing in Europe. You know, Iran exaggerates its missile capabilities. We buy into it and exaggerate the threat of Europe. The Russians exaggerate the threat of those missile defense systems to their own systems. So we have this total dysfunctional relationship going on, and we have two missile defense sites being built in Europe based upon dysfunctional relationships where everybody is exaggerating and people buy into each other's exaggeration.
The perceptions from today.
Yeah, yeah.
Hi. It seems to me that having a nuclear weapon is the best thing that any aspiring regional power or even a great power would want. So can anything really be done against Iran to prevent them from developing the bomb, except from invading and destroying their facilities?
Let me try to recognize. I think you're right. There are two arguments. The first argument is that I really agree with you, Director of National Intelligence, which is I played war games where we played Iran. We want a nuclear weapon so the United States won't come into the region.
Right, exactly. Or so they can have leverage against Israel, whoever wants to interfere.
Exactly.
Yep.
Now, can you prevent it from getting weapons, which may then lead to some answers? You know, the Europeans say, and you hear from the Iranians, we need a regional security guarantee. I mean, that's the same thing. But it could be the same thing. So that maybe we could replace nuclear weapons with a regional security guarantee. Back at me again?
Last question, I promise. I think the Israeli psyche can be summed up in 2 words, never again. I think Benjamin Netanyahu embodies that more than any other person on the planet. So you have an Iranian president who professes to believe that the coming of the 12th Imam is going to be expedited by suffering of the faithful Iranian Shia. That doesn't augur well for responsible weapons management. Then, more alarmingly, you have former President Rafsanjani, who is arguably in line to become supreme leader after Khamenei's death, who said that although that Iran could survive a nuclear retaliation from Israel, but one nuclear weapon would cut Israel in half, destroy Israel. My question is, when Netanyahu says that to Obama in a few months, how should Obama respond?
Wow, that's tough. Well, let me say first of all about Ahmadinejad. If this was the table where the Iranian Security Council was meeting, the Supreme Leader would sit here, then going down the table, there would be the Revolutionary Guard. The president is down here, only in front of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, right? They're way at the end of the table. He doesn't have control of the nuclear weapons program. He may not even be talked about. There's an article in the paper about the people that get together and decide on the nuclear weapons program. His name wasn't mentioned. The weapons program is run by the Revolutionary Guard. The world has been full of crazies, and I'm not sure it isn't best policies to ignore crazies. It's like the second letter during the Cuban Missile Crisis. You pick the one you want. I'm arguing in extremes because I'm trying to break us out of the whole thing. And so, he's a crazy you. And I've done simulations with the State Department. They always say, if you're going to talk to anybody, talk to the Supreme Leader. You want to talk to this guy has no authority. He talks like he does. And he has more influence than others have. But all this stuff goes on. The more we talk about it, the more we give him. So I just now, what you tell the president is, he's going to have to, this bullet's got to be big. It's going to be hard. Whether or not the new administration is willing to take on the Israeli lobby, which is going to start getting stronger and stronger. And the first is in that full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal today. That's why I guess policy is important to have policy now.
From what you're saying, then, we categorically say that
it is impossible for Israel to carry out a strike on its own. Number one, it needs Iraqi airspace. And number two, the size of its air force is not going to be able to deal with the sort of ancillary threats that you carry out. Which goes out a pretty safe statement that it is impossible for Israel to do it on its own.
As a military man, my judgment is they cannot be distracted and accomplish these things.
Do they know that?
I think they do. I think we've told them. I think the Bush administration told them. And I think they use the strike to pressure the United States. You know, it's not about pressuring Iran. It's about pressuring us to do something.
Do you want to
taking everything you've said about Israel, with which I agree, are you actually saying that the Israelis are driving the battle out of Washington table talk, or do they believe there's something real there?
I think I can answer that. I think, because of the never-again, they would always push the assumption to the worst case. So in their mind, they were arguing what needs to be done.
But I'm asking about our administration. Why are we hearing this? And you just referenced the Israel topic. So I'm asking you what you think they think behind the scenes in Washington. Are they responding because the Israelis are making this noise? Is that why we're hearing Clinton and Gates and now Obama?
There is historical evidence to suggest they are. Obama's statement at AIPAC was right out of the Israeli playbook. Secretary Clinton, in her most recent statements, even started out by saying we have to stop the Iranian nuclear weapons program. Disagreeing with what the DNI said. She went to the Israeli assumption that they have a weapons program. It's going to be very hard for them to turn an ear to that.
What about Mitchell? Perhaps he seems to be slightly outside that camp, certainly with the report that he prepared in 2000.
Yeah. It's hard to know how that envoy system is going to unfold. It really is. It could backfire. Right now, you have to say, however, and you can start with this, looking at what each the people at the head of departments of administration said about nuclear weapons. They don't have their storyline right because they're saying different things. So they're still searching probably for the way. And I don't know whether you've ever heard this, but the Bush administration was never able to agree on a strategy for Iran. They met on that for almost 6 years because someone always put on the table our ultimate objective is regime change. And that would then stop the conversation. So the United States never had a formulated strategy on what to do with Iran. So there are times in U.S. government when this difference of opinion just brings people to a stop. Please.
Are we back to a Cold War with Russia over petroleum resources, and in a way Iran and Israel are our proxies?
We are on the edge of the cliff. If we decide wrongly, we could end up in a Cold War with Russia. I mean, sometimes I have the ability, I have a friend who do this, I guess I grow into it, which is you can scare yourself with your own ideas, right? I can do that. The Russians would benefit from a serious crisis in the Middle East. As the price of oil, so they need oil to go up because they're having serious economic problems. A prolonged crisis between the United States and Iran would help the Russians. That's scary.
Well, on this hopeful note, we have, unfortunately, to conclude, and in the name of the Woodrow School and the Legal Study Institute, and you all here, I thank.
I thought you were going to give us.
I'll just get
You have one sentence for the solution.
And I couldn't get the solution. Okay. The first thing the United States has to do is take covert operations off the table. The United States has to say to the Iranians, we have stopped supporting proxy groups. We are no longer supporting groups conducting assassination inside Iran. And they say, and we don't believe you have a nuclear weapons program. Let's talk.